Speaking of Democrats, Joe Lestingi is Skyping into us, and here as a nonpartisan, objective observer, journalist, and editor, senior editor for Newsmax magazine, David Patten, a native of Virginia, which started all this stuff. David, it's good to have you in.
Good to be with you guys.
Well, let's take this to our friend Brother Lestingi, because I tried to set up the commonality of leadership races, but Joe, I'm guessing that for the Democrats, the answer is going to be, well, look at those Republicans. They can't even keep a leadership team intact. What is going to be the likely Democrat response to the proceedings in the Republican conference today?
Well, JD, first, thanks for having me. And I have to say, I've never had such a great, entertaining intro as you just put forward. That was very humorous.
Because you know the punchline, really, right? You know the punchline to the Mo Udall observation, right?
Absolutely. So let me just say this from the Democratic perspective. The Republican infighting is always something that is humorous to us in general. And I'm sure Republicans do the same whenever we run. But what is probably the most disappointing aspect of this is that there are two positions open, the number 2 and then hopefully, or more than likely, the number 3 position. And yet the female congresswoman from Washington is not even in consideration for those 2 positions. Instead, there are a group of white men, which is pretty party, to be running for these positions, and there's no women up there. There are lots of Southern women that they could be talking about that aren't even getting mentioned, and that's kind of disheartening.
Well, Joe, and I appreciate that. That's a good shot. That's okay. So now it's the war on women. But here's the thing, Joe, and this is not theological, but it's something called free will. Sure. Presumably, everybody in the conference is free to run unless they aspire to become a committee chair. And you have very many. You mentioned Kathy McMorris Rodgers, who has the job that I coveted, that I ran for, and I lost to a woman, to Deb Price of Ohio back in the day. So I appreciate it, though. It kind of telegraphs where you're headed here. Let's go to Dave Patten. As I was saying earlier, you're from Virginia. Yeah. This was all predicated on the upset of Eric Cantor. Now Eric, very diplomatically, riding off in the sunset, he says in the general election he will be there casting a ballot for Dave Bratt. But I imagine that Cantor may be leaving his leadership post. He'll stay for the rest of his term. His fate not forgotten by his fellow Republicans.
No, not at all. I mean, certainly he's had a strong legacy. But before we go there, I just got to get back to Joe here real quick. I mean, this is one of the cardinal seminal differences between Republicans and Democrats. It would be almost inconceivable for the Democratic Conference to have a leadership race like this without having a woman, without having perhaps an African American, without having a Latino. So pardon the Republicans, Joe, that they're looking for, number one, who wants the job, because until you toss your hat in the ring, obviously you can't get the job. And secondly, for the candidate who would be the best qualified. Of course, there's a lot of qualified women. Of course, there's a lot of qualified African Americans now who are moving into the party. We've seen in Illinois, we see Joni Ernst, who got the nomination, Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia. So the notion that, that's this old war on women, which, let's face it, the reason Joe's bringing that up as a Democratic strategist is that is the Democratic platform in this year's elections, to try to drum up some war on women or some war on class warfare, when the reality is that Americans want jobs, they want to get the economy fixed, and they want to have some leadership in the White House again.
So, Joe, we're going to give you a chance. Is this the deal? Is to put it in common parlance, is that all you got to run on in the midterms?
Well, I'll say this. If you have been following the press lately, the Republican Party seems to continue to have a problem with the word rape. A Republican in Maine just recently came out with this. They have a real problem politically with women, and it showed in Virginia. I am also from Virginia. I followed the race in the 7th very closely, but I also followed the gubernatorial race very closely last year. They do have a problem with a very key constituency. And we all know, I mean, we're all politically savvy enough to know that perception in our business is very much the reality. And unfortunately, that there's no credence given to female candidates for these leadership positions, and there should be. Even if it is something that the Republicans aren't open to or say there's no one running, that doesn't mean they couldn't nominate someone who is a woman that they back. And that's a real problem, especially going into these midterm elections where, let's remember.
There you go again, Joe. There you go again, Joe.
Well, it's really, Joe, look, you're right. We've all, this ain't our first rodeo, okay? But to keep pushing that, Kathy McMorris Rogers is chairman of the House Republican Conference. She crafts the message. She offered the response to President Obama. So to say that somehow women are being shut out of GOP leadership, to put it politely, is counterfactual. It just runs against the fact.
I very much appreciate that point, but she's not even considered for the #2 position, which is an extremely important position. And I think that that's an important note. I mean, Republicans, and I'm just saying this from a strategic standpoint, that they actually could benefit then if they put a prominent woman forward, because that's what the public is looking at right now going into these midterm elections. Who is leading their party right now? And unfortunately, there are no women up there in the 2 prominent positions of Speaker or of Majority Leader.
Well, while you find that lacking in some way, and we appreciate that, Joe, again, that's politics. Let's boil this down. It's going to be really interesting. You talked about the race for deputy whip. And, of course, this will only take place if Kevin McCarthy is able to move up to leadership.
Absolutely.
Of the 3 running, and this where it really gets into House of Cards-like material. It would be the same thing in the Democrat caucus. Steve Scalise of Louisiana, very confident he can win this thing. Here's what he told Politico, quote, "I would rather be us than them right now, and I think they would probably rather be us as well." So I think when you look at it, we're in a very strong position in gaining momentum. That's the good side, that we're actually getting more support every day, and we're going to win, and we're going to strengthen our team going forward. What would it say if a Peter Roskam, who is the chief deputy whip, is displaced by someone who's not a stranger to the whip organization, but someone perceived as an outsider?
Absolutely. And if I may for a second, the interesting thing that's going on here, and this is what I love about these leadership fights, for both parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, is there's also a geographical divide that has popped up, which is fascinating to watch. These Southern Republicans right now basically saying, hey, listen, we represent the largest plurality of Republicans in this conference. We think we should have a leadership role. So the fact that a gentleman from Indiana and a gentleman from Illinois are being considered really makes this fight very, very newsworthy, because the Southern Caucus seems to be organizing very strongly, which is something we haven't seen them do in a while.
And that may be the key, Joe. That's right. That may be the key. David, what they're saying is, and we got less than a minute left, but this is going to be the race for #2, and basically it'll center on who becomes the chief deputy whip. The outreach coming from Scalise to the conservative wing of the party.
Well, let us not forget that Peter Roskam has promised that he is going to appoint a red state Republican as his deputy whip if he wins that seat. So he's politicking based on trying to appeal to those same red state votes that a Steve Scalise would represent.
Well, it is good to have the insights here on the anchor desk from you, Dave Patten. Joe Lestingi, as always, in Washington. We thank you for insight into the Democratic response. And we're interested on your take there at home. What do you think will come out of this House leadership race? Are conservatives going to be disappointed? Why don't you tweet us your remarks at Newsmax TV, #AmericasForum.